wanted you to hear it from me first, that after more than 8 incredible months, I'm ending my presidential campaign.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Tim Lake in Albany. It is official now. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand has ended her once promising 2020 presidential campaign. The 52-year-old U.S. Senator tweeted the video announcement Wednesday, ending her sputtering White House bid. And it came on the same day she learned that she would miss the next Democratic presidential debate in Houston due to low polling and fundraising numbers. She failed to reach the necessary 2% threshold in 4 DNC-approved polls and the required 130,000 unique financial donors.
I know this isn't the result we wanted. We wanted to win this race. But it's important to know when it's not your time and to know how you can best serve your community and country. I believe I can best serve by helping to unite us to beat Donald Trump in 2020.
Now, Senator Gillibrand hoped to stay in long enough to make another debate next month, but she had to spend heavily to keep her name in the limelight, and she depleted much of her campaign money. Gillibrand said she would endorse another candidate and wants to help elect women up and down the ballot, but at this point, we simply don't know who she will endorse. Governor Cuomo, meanwhile, says this is just a speed bump for Gillibrand, calling her, quote, a great talent, a rising star in the Democratic Party, and a good friend. He says the people of New York are fortunate to have her back full time. But New York GOP Chairman Nick Langworthy says the state is, quote, better off without her. He says she's been using her Senate office to chase her national ambitions for the last 4 years, while doing nothing, he says, for the New Yorkers who pay her salary. It's no surprise, he says, that voters, even in her home state, rejected her for her, quote, lackluster record. And President Trump also chimed in on this, tweeting, quote, a sad day for the Democrats. Kirsten Gillibrand has dropped out of the presidential primary. I'm glad they never found out that she was the one I was really afraid of. Now, Gillibrand isn't the only New York Democrat who got some bad news this week. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio was also left on the outside looking in for the September 12th debate, after he also failed to hit that 2% benchmark. He can still qualify, though, for the next debate if he gets his numbers up by then. So, joining us now from Washington to talk about Senator Gillibrand's campaign is Gary Nordlinger, Professor Gary Nordlinger from George Washington University, who's a renowned political campaign expert. Mr. Nordlinger, thank you for joining us here on Empire State Weekly.
Thank you.
So
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks.
I guess this begs the question, was it more of the money issue or it was simply the poor polling that caused Gillibrand to drop out?
All the above. She just never had her breakout moment in this election. You know, we've had 24 candidates on the Democratic side, or at least did, and she just never stood out from the crowd.
All right, in her platform, she came out in the early stages as one to challenge Trump and also advocating for women's rights. Why do you think that these issues never really resonated with voters?
Because everyone's saying they're the ones that can beat Trump. Everyone's in favor of women's issues. I mean, you know, there are very, very subtle differences on the issues among these candidates, none of which stands out. Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington State, was trying to make climate change the centerpiece of his campaign, and he never got traction.
So Gillibrand even had trouble attracting supporters here in New York State, along with Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina.
Exactly.
And it was interesting to see here in New York. Why do you suppose that is? She couldn't even attract a big audience in her own state.
Yeah, it's true, but it reminds me a lot, actually, of the 2016 Republican nomination. There you had 17 candidates, including most of the 18. But Lindsey Graham never got traction. Lindsey Graham never stood out. Lindsey Graham never got a percentage of the vote in his own home state of South Carolina. So Gillibrand is kind of the Lindsey Graham of the 2020 campaign.
Interesting. Now, she was also an early critic of former Senator Al Franken and his downfall. And a lot of people suggested that hurt her among progressive Democrats, as both of them were progressives. Did that make any difference?
Listen, I think virtually this entire Democratic field appeals to progressive Democrats, number one. Number two, it may have hurt her fundraising among the big donors. Why would the big donors be giving her money anyway, as opposed to giving to Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris?
So it'll
just
be
as
interesting to
examples.
see if she will play a decisive role in helping choose the Democratic candidate. Now, she has said she would endorse somebody eventually and that she wants to help women rise to the top. Do you anticipate she would endorse a woman, given what she has said?
I think that is a logical conclusion. The big question is, when will she make the endorsement? And, you know, she could be a real asset, for example, in the New York primary, just campaigning around the state with whichever candidate she decides to adopt.
How about the Trump factor? Do you think that Trump ridiculing her outright made a difference in people taking her seriously?
No, 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 no. Getting attacked by Trump is almost, you know, a badge of honor within Democratic politics. So I don't think that affected her at all within the nomination.
And one other thing that she took some criticism for when she was running for re-election for the Senate here in New York State, she really would not admit to her national ambitions. And a lot of people here in New York felt that she should have at least said something about it because not long after she won re-election, she announced that she would be running for president. Do you think that damaged her?
Yeah. I don't think it damaged her nationally. It may be damaging within the state of New York. Listen, the good news for Senator Gillibrand is she did not embarrass herself in this campaign. You know, I remember when Rick Perry first ran for president, he really embarrassed himself. And Senator Gillibrand did not do that. But picking up on your initial question, if you recall, when Hillary Clinton initially ran for senator in New York, she promised she would not be a candidate in 2004, and she honored that promise.
All right. Now we have another well-known Democrat, at least here in New York State, still in the running, and that is New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. And we have countless others. Do you anticipate candidates who can't seem to get the train moving, like de Blasio, and some of the others to drop off sooner or later?
Well, I think it's going to be a question of both, depending on who the candidate is. Some of these candidates just simply love retail politics, and it does not take a lot of money to be, you know, going around the various counties in Iowa meeting people. Other folks are going to sit there and say, man, this just isn't worth it. I have a current office I need to protect. Perhaps I'm up for re-election next year. So I think you'll see people continuing to drop out. But there are clearly three stratas of candidates. The top two strata have made this debate, but the top strata is still, you know, Biden, Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Kamala Harris.
One final question here, Professor Nordlinger. What do you think the eventual Democratic nominee must do to really make him or herself stand out and be able to really be a factor in taking on President Trump?
First of all, not making mistakes that will come back to haunt them in the general election. I thought a lot of these candidates made huge mistakes in the first primary when Julian Castro said, you know, who's going to stand up with me in terms of decriminalizing crossing the borders. So 7 candidates are now on the record for quote-unquote open borders. The Republicans are going to have a field day with that. And then it's really going to be a question of, I hate to say it, whoever wins this is going to be the one that is the least disliked between the two candidates. You know, Trump is as unpopular as you can possibly make him. Right. So the question is, will the Republicans manage to make the Democratic nominee more unpopular than Donald Trump?
All right, it's going to be fascinating to watch. Listen, we appreciate your expertise on our New York candidates here, one dropping out, one still in, 2 still in, I should say, on the Republican side. Indeed. Professor Gary Nordlinger, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, 2 new state laws that affect our schools, including new laws about guns. What they mean for all of us simply trying to keep our kids safe in school. Welcome back, everyone, to Empire State Weekly. I'm Tim Lake in Albany. 2 high-profile state laws were passed this year, going into effect within days of each other this week. Now, the first is the red flag law. This will allow police, school administrators, and family members to seek an extreme risk order of protection from a court to temporarily remove people's guns and prevent them from buying one if they are shown to be a clear and convincing danger to themselves or others. Now, the other is the new marijuana decriminalization bill, which eliminates criminal penalties for possession of up to 2 ounces of marijuana, making maximum penalties a $50 fine. It also seals and expunges tens of thousands of criminal records for past marijuana convictions. This law was hailed as a small step forward when it comes to equality in our criminal justice system, and it's a precursor of what may be legal marijuana in New York State next year. Another judge here in New York has ruled against allowing unvaccinated kids back into the classroom amid a significant measles outbreak as school begins in New York State this week. The state Supreme Court judge ruled against a lawsuit that claimed the new state law violates people's rights of religious expression, saying people's religious freedoms don't trump the public health. Now, this ruling follows a similar federal decision that was dropped last month after a judge denied a motion for a preliminary injunction. We should note here that judges have historically ruled in favor of our rights when it comes to public health. And joining us here now on Empire State Weekly to discuss this issue and some others when it comes to keeping our kids safe and healthy is New York State School Boards Association Executive Director Tim Creamer. Thank you very much, Mr. Creamer, for being with us here today.
Thank you, Tim.
All right, right off the top here, we've had a whole summer and a spring of these concerns about the measles epidemic, a minor epidemic across New York State, from Rochester down to the Hudson Valley. As a parent, should we be concerned at all about sending our kids back to school this week?
Well, the religious exemption that was available to parents is no longer available. Only available is a medical exemption where a child simply can't have this inoculation. There were about 26,000 children who had a religious exemption, and those families have to figure out what they're going to do. They're either going to get this child vaccinated within the first 14 days of coming to school.
So they do have a little grace period.
Got a little bit of a window, but you got to have a plan in place, and there has to be in writing saying we're going to have this first dosage within 14 days and a scheduled dosages after that. Or you're going to have to homeschool these children, and that is something that a lot of parents seem to be taking into account, or you're going to have to move out of state.
I want to follow up on this. I don't know if it's rumor, speculation, or fact, but I'm seeing people say that they believe that next up is a requirement for a flu vaccination and or the HPV vaccination. Is that something you've heard anything about?
I guess I'm not surprised, but I have not heard anything about that per se. But the fact that people say these vaccinations are out there, if they're good for measles, why not the flu? The difference here is, of course, the flu has different strands. And so you're going to have to vary it every year. But with measles, we had that knocked. And that's a one-time deal or at least a series of dosages, and eventually you don't have that problem any longer.
Let's shift gears here a bit. As you know, the state legislature passed some new laws that have a great impact on schools. And one of them that got a lot of attention was the availability of putting cameras on the stop arms as they come down when school buses are going by. And I know the School Boards Association was very much involved in this. But Diane and I have been reporting on the news here that it seems like they left something out when it comes to funding. Explain to us, the funding is what? The requirement is you have to go to your municipality to get the funding or get funding through them?
Yeah, it actually, I think, is a creative solution, because you're going to have school districts that do not have a way to collect the fines. So we had to kind of circle back and say, all right, how about the municipality buy the equipment and with permission from the school district, attach it to that stop arm camera on the bus owned by the school district, and you, the school, or you, the municipality, monitor this, collect the fine, determine who's in violation and prosecute them and collect the fines and use those monies to pay for the equipment to put on these cameras. So honestly, I think it was a pretty creative way they came up with this.
But if I'm a school district, a large school district, and I go to my municipality and say I need $400,000,
right,
that's not going to happen right away, is it?
There is a need for them to work out an agreement, and you could see where there may be some municipalities saying, we're not going to do that. we don't think we're going to have enough revenue generated from fines to pay for the equipment. And so there will be a negotiation that takes place. But yes, if you were thinking state aid was going to fund all of these camera equipment and the installation, that does not exist.
Not going to happen.
All right, I know we have a lot of topics to cover. What guidelines are you offering to districts about the new red flag laws?
Well, you know, those are in place, and that's something where a red flag would say that a school official, an educator, somebody within the school district can go to the school administrator and say, I am concerned that we have within this school a person who could be a danger to themselves or a danger to others, and I believe they have access to firearms.
So at what level? Let me stop you there and say, what level? Could it be a teacher or a teacher's aide who can make this determination, or does that person have to take it to the superintendent or the board, as in your case, and then that higher official would then go to the court to ask to
I'm not sure if
put
it's
the
a
red flag up?
superintendent who has to sign up, but a school administrator.
It would be a higher official.
You
then.
have to go to a school administrator and say, I think we got a problem here. That school administrator has to agree with you and sign some document that starts a process. Law enforcement gets involved, does an investigation. A judge eventually
So a judge has to sign off on it then?
Yeah, this
Okay,
is an order of protection that is signed off on, giving law enforcement the right to go into a home or some other place where this child or this person has access to firearms and remove those firearms from that person's access. You can imagine this is going to be a very interesting implementation process when people are going to say, wait a minute, those are my guns. They're not his guns. What do you mean you're taking my guns away?
What have you been hearing from your boards around the state about how this is going to be handled?
Interestingly enough, I think they're happy about this. We've all heard the stories. Dayton was the most recent one where they said, you know, we all knew this kid had a problem. He had access to guns. He was always talking about violent acts. Somebody should have jumped in here before this. This is the opportunity, I think, for us to say, here's something we got to pay attention to, and he has access to guns. Let's get those guns away from him for a period of time, and maybe we can cool down this situation.
A lot of new laws were passed this year, but I have to bring this up. In 2000, the Safe Schools Against Violence Act came out, and in June of this year, Controller Tom DiNapoli released the results from an audit that found that a lot of schools aren't doing what they need to do when it comes to their planning to protect students against violence. So what's your response to that? What's going on?
We got to do a better job in that regard. Unfortunately, I think oftentimes this is one of those things that is lower on the priority until a problem exists.
So we passed the laws.
We passed the law, and we need to, and I'm happy, in fact, that the controller has said what he said. We've got to pay attention, do a better job of making sure we have a safe and secure environment.
To that point, the other thing the legislature worked on was who can ever carry a gun on school grounds in the future. And I guess the way this law is, they've limited it to school resources officers or a police officer that might be called to the school. Is that adequate? Is that sufficient? Or are people happy with that?
It's better than having teachers walking around with guns. That's something that was being proposed, and we don't think that's a good idea, and I don't think the teachers do either. This is having people who are trained, who are properly licensed, who know what they're doing, on a very limited basis, having a firearm on the school property.
Yeah, well, it certainly was a watershed year for new laws that have an impact on school boards and administrations around the state, hasn't it?
It has. You know, we would like to think that we could focus on education issues, and what we're focusing on is safety and security.
It's a sign of our times. All right, Tim Kramer with the School Boards Association here in New York State. We appreciate you joining us. Creamer. I was reminded to think of coffee creamer on that.
Right.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, a new law is going to help the children in your life recognize the signs of abuse and specifically how to get help. We're going to tell you in a moment how it works. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly, everyone. I'm Tim Lake in Albany. 2 more laws on the books now help victims of abuse. One of those is the long fought for Aaron's Law. Now, this law is designed to prevent child sexual abuse and exploitation by requiring public schools to teach child sexual abuse prevention classes to kindergarten through 8th graders. The hope is that children will learn to recognize the warning signs of abuse and, of course, how to get some help, too. Another one allows victims of domestic violence to terminate multi-year telephone or cable contracts at the home that they are leaving without paying a penalty. Now, this law applies to victims who have received an order of protection when escaping abusers. Well, there are a couple of new twists in the state's latest hot-button issue, new license plates for a lot of people. Coming up, how the DMV is now responding to criticism that these new plates coming next year with their $25 fee are just a, quote, money grab for the state. And finally, here on Empire State Weekly, if we thought we'd heard the last of the new license plate fee debate, well, we might have been wrong. Republican Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb wants state lawmakers to pass legislation removing a mandatory $25 fee to replace license plates that are more than 10 years old. It's the same as Buffalo area State Senator Robert Ort's bill that would waive the fees for plates with a new design that millions of New Yorkers will have to buy starting next April.
I think that legislators have a responsibility to respond to their constituents, not to their political leader or to the governor. And that's why we're doing press conferences like this across the state, more public awareness. Call your state senator, call your state assembly person, and ask them to support this bill or any bill that's going to stop the new fee.
Also, Republican State Senator Jim Tedisco from the Capital Region wants Senate Transportation Committee Chair Tim Kennedy to hold a hearing on the governor's plan to replace all license plates that are more than 10 years old. And he wants the DMV to explain where the roughly $75 million in revenue would go, assuming some 3 million people get these new plates at $25 a pop. His analysis, by the way, shows the plates cost less than $3 to make. Now, on the other side, DMV Commissioner Mark Schroeder is calling the whole thing hypocrisy and irresponsible cheap press hits. He says the $25 fee has been in place for more than 10 years, since before the Cuomo administration. And he says that no one has ever proposed changing that fee. He says lawmakers could pass legislation to do so in an emergency session now or next session before the fees go into effect in April. For now, for all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Tim Lake in Albany. We'll see you right back here next week. And don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. So here now is the full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 TV stations across New York State.